What we're doing that's super unique is that we're combining the emerging science of behavior change that everyone's talking about because it's responsible for healthy habit formation. And we are coupling it together with the fun of gaming or gamification to really reinvent the way that bottom-up wellness programs are being designed right now across North America.
We are currently living in a paradox. We possess the most advanced medical technology in history, yet we're witnessing what today's guest calls a self-inflicted serial killing of our own well-being. Today on the DNA of Things, we sit down with Dr. Travis McDonough, a man who spent decades optimizing the world's most elite athletes before realizing that the real championship isn't won in the NBA or NFL, it's won at the top of a cliff. Travis is a serial entrepreneur who turned the desirable difficulty of dyslexia into a superpower for pattern recognition. He is now calling for $1 trillion shift, a move away from the ambulances waiting at the bottom of the healthcare cliff toward building stronger fences at the top. Prepared to look past the check engine light of reactive medicine and discover a future where technology doesn't hijack our attention, but restores our communities. Are you ready to see the blueprint for the next generation of wellness?
Dr. Travis McDonough is a serial entrepreneur, decades-long track record of bridging health, performance, and technology. Based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Dr. McDonough is widely recognized as the founder of Conduct Technologies, an industry-leading human performance platform. Under his leadership, Conduct supported over 650 professional sports organizations, including teams in the NBA, NFL, MLB, contributing to 25 world championships before its high-profile acquisition in 2020. Now, if that wasn't impressive enough, McDonough's current venture, Wellnify AI, represents a shift from elite performance to democratized wellness. The platform fuses behavioral science and gamification to encourage healthy habits at the grassroots level, rewarding users for physical activity and community acts of kindness, such as blood donation and volunteer. He's also the younger son of the late Alexa McDonough, a legendary Canadian political leader whose legacy of public service deeply informs his mission to form these creative solutions for preventative care. Dr. Travis McDonough, welcome, my friend. It's great to have you on the DNA of Things.
Great to be here. You know how fond I am of you and the work that you do. So it's a great honor to have a conversation with you this afternoon.
Well, it's as you say, we've known each other. I want to say, if not one, almost two decades, at least in passing, but certainly, more intimately in the, let's say, the thrills through entrepreneurship. You've always been a great friend, great mentor. And, it's wonderful now to be able to host you and have you share some of your adventures with the listeners at large. And as much as I think it's timely that we're here to talk about some of the, amazing, recent success of Wellnify, what's really equally exciting for me is, to present, some of the more, let's say, intimate details of, the entrepreneur who's operating behind the scenes of these incredible operations. And so one of the things I'd love to start with is, and again, you and I are in the same cloth in this sense, and that's the fighter phenotype, right? And we'll get to that kind of persistence through the 13th round, because that's actual experience that you've had with boxing. But I want to pair that also with maybe a starting point is this dyslexia as a superpower. You often had spoken about, this, call it learning disability, that you've reframed into something entirely different. You've become more of a visual learner, a kinesthetic learner. And so how does that kind of constraint become something more and perhaps become your biggest competitive advantage in what it is that you do today?
Yeah, look, there's a lot to unpack on a bunch of different topics that you referenced. And if I take a step back, what might make sense, Jeremy, is if I talk about some of the earliest influences on my life, one of which is my learning disability. I think the other is my family. You referenced my mother, and then sport. So if it's okay, kind of unpack on how those three things really help to colonize my future and really put a heavy influence on it. Maybe it can start with the biggest influence, which were my parents. My mother, as you referenced to, was definitely a thought leader. She was a pioneer. She was a political leader before there was a women's washroom. And I watched her chase a big dream her whole life. And I watched her sacrifice even her own health to pursue that goal. And she taught me so many things, right? Above all, join a cause, not because it's got a high chance of succeeding, but more than anything, because it stirs your soul. I think she taught me about living full and dying empty, right? Making sure you leave it all on the field or all in the ring. And I think she taught me that service is the rent you pay for being. It's a responsibility. So she was a huge influence. I think my father, who sometimes gets overlooked, but might even have been a bigger influence. He was a big believer in me. I, joke saying he was my biggest fan. And there is a superpower that a father's belief can instill in an individual. And he kind of never looked at me as who I was. It always at who I could become. And, I think I've sort of studied that impact. And there's something called the Pygmalion effect, that you rise or fall based on the expectations of the people around you. So I knew he had high expectations of me. And when I wasn't a particularly productive member of society, his expectations drove me forward. And he really made a big, big impact. And there's a saying that, I do my best because I count on you to count on me. And again, that was a really, really heavy influence on me. I think the second thing that you referenced is my learning disability. And I think back at the time, there wasn't exactly a diagnosis that was readily available. So you sort of wore the dunce cap in the corner. I had a cocktail of ADD, of dyslexia, of slow processing. And true story, in high school, I sat through English language development. I was the only English as a first language participant in those classes. And my brain just worked differently. I wasn't able to think through things from A to B. So you got to get really creative. And I think I sprouted or cultivated innovative ways to try to make things happen. And as you said, imagination started to flourish. Thankfully, I discovered technology, which was a big landscape to kind of hold the extent of my imagination. But I think you also learn listening skills. And I think you learn pattern recognition, and looking back on the learning challenges, literally they became a distinct advantage. And I call them a desirable difficulty because I lean heavily on those attributes now that never would have happened if I learned the traditional way. And I think the last thing, it's probably important to mention, we'll probably double click on this in the conversation, but you and I both, I think, can say that sport was an enormous influence on the trajectory of our lives. And I felt, maybe it was my ADD, whatever it might have been, my teenage brain, but my brain was caught between two radio stations. And it was almost like I had a sludge between my brain and my soul. And the only time that sludge got dislodged when I was competing in sport. And there is something so raw and authentic, and there's an exuberant clarity when you're participating in sports, sort of the minutes before the bell rings or when the ball's suspended in air. And that purity really is where I found salvation. And that influence made me want to pursue sport or wellness or human performance in some way, shape, or form to be my life. I was never good enough to make pro sports my business, but somehow found a way to be involved in health, wellness, and human performance. So those were really the three earliest influences of my life. And they've kind of defined the trajectory of my life.
I mean, and then, you find this creative way to get into this arena that, few people step into. Those that do, the casualties are, far outweigh, let's say, the survivors and the success. And, there's something to be said for, I guess it's nothing fails like success, right? So success really, hopefully looks like something of, of the sort of, well, I got knocked down 12 times and I got up 13, right? And so, that is something that I've always respected about you, seeing the behind the scenes, hard work and the reality of the uncertainty until that last moment that in the end, nobody could have really predicted, which is interesting. It's interesting now to hear you say, like the Pygmalion effect that you spoke of, like your father, right? Like he created this kind of void, and not void in the negative sense, but like void in the kind of black hole, intense gravity sense, that this is the greatness that is of unknown depths that, I'm suggesting you might be pulled to. and really, frankly, nobody else can see. And so, as I say, there were many moments, there were many times where, the investment deal fell through, or, the high impact leader, left much to be desired. That would have been, because of conflicting commitments that, teammates or collaborators, like the sure thing was never the sure thing. So, I mean,
No,
tell me
definitely.
some of those stories that you can remember, that you want to share, just for the entrepreneurs out there who are contemplating whether or not they should get up again.
Yeah. Wow. And look, I still give you credit for a presentation you gave, and I'm trying to think of where it was, but one of your slides it said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And when you're an entrepreneur, it's not a matter of if you're going to get punched in the face. It's just how many times and how hard, right? So it's the price of admission when you go into this space. And it's a very demanding mistress. It's very, very unforgiving. And you don't go into it and think that you're not going to have very significant problems. And I think that's the biggest problem, is when people enter into it thinking that they're going to get away with a punch in the face. And there's almost so many that it's hard to, kind of bring up 3 or 4. But look, here's one, for example. We, in Kinduct, which was the professional sport company, we did a Series A, which was led by Intel Capital. It was also supported by the Dodgers, the 49ers, we had Magic Johnson, Peter Gruber. We had a lot of very, very strategic investors. And one of the reasons why we took the money from Intel, not just because they were the largest institutional VC, but because they had a new business unit called the Curie chip. And the chip, the concept was that it was going to go into lots of different sports equipment in order to elicit data that would enter into our platform. But the night before our second board meeting after the investment, Intel scrapped the Curie chip program. And what that did was instantly eliminate about $4 million worth of ARR in our forecast for that upcoming year. We had hired to support that, and we thought it was an inevitability that this was going to take us to a rocket ship to the moon. But what ended up happening is we got sideswiped and tail whipped by just a giant company, and it wasn't their fault. I don't hold them accountable. We shouldn't have put the same concentration risk, in that situation. And so it was really, really tough. We had to immediately lay off about 25 people. And some of these people were friends. Some of them were related family members. And one of the toughest business days of my life, to have 25 people that we had to lay off in succession in one day. So, that's just one of countless stories that you almost know you're going to experience. You don't the first time around, but now this is a part of the expansion and contraction of normal business. Maybe one other story that's almost it's a positive story, but this was later in the Kinduct journey, and we weren't profitable. So we were running out of money. And the board at the time, there were certain reasons, justified reasons, where they were not going to follow on and do an investment. So they wanted us to do another round of layoffs. I was not comfortable with it. So I went and I took the last mortgage I could on my house to get the money to ensure that we didn't have to lay anybody off. I brought all of the sales team in the boardroom, and I took my keys out of the pocket and I threw my keys on the boardroom table, and I explained that these are the keys to my house and I am all in. I have nothing left, and I'm asking you guys to raise your performance. I'm betting on you that we can get through this. And that conversation in that moment was literally the turning point for Conduct. Everybody, you could just see their work rate. You could see how much longer they were working throughout the day. And somehow, through a collective will, we turned the corner. We generated substantial revenue. And I think the collective belief in each other is what, ended up carrying the ball in the end zone in the exit in 2020. But yeah, you know yourself, Jeremy, that this is a unforgiving territory, and you're going to, you're have lots of different carnage, and you got to be ready for it.
It's funny to hear you talk through to not expect to be punched in the face would be naive. And it's funny, I actually think back to like the first time I really actually got punched in the face, like with my boxing career. And it was, I had a coach. So he was my coach right now. I think at this time I was around 14, 15. And we were getting ready for the club's first, hosted bout in preparation for like the Canadian Golden Gloves Ontario circuit. And I still remember my coach was, he was Cole. He's quite a bit older than me. He was like 17, 18. But like I said, he was my coach. But then his coach manager was there prepping him for this fight. And like, oh, just do some sparring with Jeremy, right? And I hadn't even sparred yet, right? And then I'm getting in with this coach that I like trusted as my coach and nurturer, and I didn't know what sparring meant. And then I just remember getting pummeled for that round. And then it didn't physically hurt, but like I went into the change room, and I was emotionally whipped, and I cried, and I was like, well, that's never going to happen again, you know. There is a sense of that when in entrepreneurship that you're not entirely ready for, where there like similar stories where like we had a great partnership with, it was like Arla Foods, and they were I think the third or fourth largest dairy conglomerate in the world.
Right.
I want to say,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's mentioned. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And we had, effectively an LOI signed for the first 1,000 athletes. We were delivering on that product, and it was going to grow to like 10,000 and 100,000 leading up to I think it was 2016 Olympic Games. Well, here's the thing is, Arla was a co-op, and milk prices went up. And, the dairy farmers were less innovation savvy and hungry. And so all their innovation contracts went out, and that meant like supporting funding to match it. And there's like $3 million in innovation funds that was going to go alongside that. And, yeah. And then, similar to your story, it was like, yeah, I had to, lay off was around like 20 people in a day. And it's
Yeah.
like,
That's tough.
and I kind of felt like that people trusted, that I just was like punching everybody in the face, and that's really rough. And I don't know where you go to school to learn how to come back from that. I think you
You know
just
what?
have to.
The only place you learn is in the chamber of truth, which is in
Mm,
the ring or
yeah.
when you become an entrepreneur. And we've talked about the many, many similarities between the two. And this is not to disrespect anyone, of course, who's never been a boxer, never been an entrepreneur. But when people say, "Oh, I'm boxing," and what they're doing is they're hitting the bag or the pads or even just the occasional sparring, but they haven't been, in a ring with someone trying to take their head clean off. There's a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
Between I box and I'm a boxer, right? It's just the same thing as the difference between a businessman and an entrepreneur. You got to talk to somebody who has to make payroll on a regular basis, creating a new idea that's never existed before. That to me is the true definition of an entrepreneur. And again, not to take anything away from business people, because again, they probably have it right. There's less risk, but the only way you truly learn is from getting through the ropes and from starting a business where you gotta pay people at the end of the day.
Yeah. So here you are, you've been through the ringer, and taking when I look at performance sport, like, the stakes are high. And I think the investment dollars from the perspective of, the teams or, the athletes, managers and the agencies, they make sense, economically and in the short term. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can see the ROI and the impact in, over the course of, weeks, months, certainly years, and they just start to compound when you look at, a guy like Tom Brady, for example. Like, that's an extended career based on data-driven insights and personalization, right? But now you jump into what you're talking about with respect to, moving, this reactive healthcare paradox that we're into, proactive community design. Now, I'd love to, maybe as a jumping off point, no pun intended, maybe use your cliff analogy that you presented to me a few days ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then, how do we shift from that, kind of like check engine light of elite athletes to this now, as I said, with Wellnify, it's more focused on the driver that is the community. And
Yeah.
why the shift? I'd love to hear that as well.
If you don't mind, if I can rewind the tape, a decade, because you only get to where you are through a circuitous journey. And maybe just to talk a little bit about Kinduct and the reason not so much to boast about the success of it, but is to frame how it influenced on what we're doing today. But so Kinduct was a really, what we did at Kinduct was we helped to create better athletes, and we did that by leveraging an AI-driven digital ecosystem that we call the Human Performance Platform. And we really had three separate but interconnected components to that: a data aggregation and analytics and a recommendation engine. And we got into the space to support the four raging demands of human performance. How do you make an athlete stronger and faster? How do you mitigate the escalating costs of soft tissue injuries? How do you identify talent? And the fourth one, which was, how do you help an organization in the arms race of amassing data, not just to unearth epiphanies, but to capitalize on these data monetization opportunities: sports betting, pro versus Joe, broadcast, those types of things. And those four demands back in like 2012 or 13 led to the birth of a brand new industry around data elicitation devices that you're well aware of. It was hard to turn your computer on without reading about some new technology that emitted information off an athlete's bodies. And while there was a lot of hype and hope, it caused an enormous problem. And that is, all the data sources were everywhere except for where they should be, which is in one location. So what we did at Conduct, we became this agnostic and promiscuous ingester of all the disparate data sources out there: blood, sweat, DNA, HRV, sleep data, electronic medical record information, XY positional tracking. We hoovered all the data pollution that was disparate. We brought it into one overarching tech platform, and through a complicated labyrinth of tech, plumbing, AI, and really sports science, out the other side came, again, discernible information that could send alerts, triggers, and notifications to the athlete or stakeholders around the athlete. And it allowed for them, for the first time, because they stacked the data sources, to look for patterns, trends, and correlations. And it was a crazy journey, Jeremy. As you referenced earlier in the show, we did support, I think, at the peak, around 650 professional sporting organizations. You know, we were in dressing rooms and in the rooms with commissioners talking about who owns what data. And we were really at the sharp tip of the spear in professional sports. We were pushing the pace of biometric Moneyball behind the scenes. The best part about the whole story is that we were doing this all with people from Nova Scotia. And, you know, we were out competing the big companies out there who would occasionally invest in the professional sports space to be able to, you know, kind of share stories at cocktail parties. And we went head to head with the SAPs. We went head to head with the Googles on multiple occasions. And I think we wore the North Star of doing this on behalf of Nova Scotia. That was absolutely the catalyst, I think, that pushed us forward. We were literally like the Jack Russell Terrier in the park that picks a fight with the German Shepherd. We were like, no one's stopping what we're doing. And you know, I got to give credit to my mentor, a guy by the name of Peter Mann, who's been one of my longest friends and mentors. I remember having a conversation with him, and he said, "Where do you think the richest place in Nova Scotia is?" And this is a bit rhetorical, but I said, "I don't know. John Bragg's backyard is at Yonge Avenue," and he said, "No, it's Camp Hill Cemetery." And he said, because that's where stories have never been told, songs have never been sung, businesses have never been started, dreams have never been realized, that you owe it to yourself and to Nova Scotia to sort of wear this crown on behalf of the tech community. And this is before all the other many tech companies that are more successful. But we were sort of pioneers, and that drove us to make this happen. So it made sipping from the cup, once we sold the company in September 2020 to a Silicon Valley based company, that much more fulfilling. And the best part about the story, Jeremy, is that it wasn't necessarily just the money. It was that it was a launching pad for dozens and dozens and dozens of careers, very successful careers. None of us had a lot of experience going into this. And, you know, there's that MLK statement: take the first step and the road will appear. And that's what happened with our group. And I'm so proud of them all that they made it happen. It was one of our philosophies. We really heavily invested in culture and belief in each other's. But very, very fulfilling journey. And if I now talk about the influence of after the sale of Kinduct, we knew, a group of us at Kinduct, we wanted to take what we used to do for LeBron James and Tom Brady, and we wanted to productize it. We wanted to colloquialize it. And above all, we wanted to democratize it. We wanted to put tools in the hands of the masses to ultimately give them agency and dominion over their health destiny. So we kind of brought the band back together. I think we've got about 15 people that previously were at Conduct, now a part of the company called Wellnify. And if it's okay now, would love to sort of dive into that. But I'm going to pause there because I know I've talked a little bit long on that first chapter.
No, that's a great setup. I mean, I think it recapitulates what I think you and I were both familiar with, and I think anybody that knows you who's listening, is probably thankful for the recap. But for those hearing it for the first time, I think that was great context. And so now coming back to jumping off the proverbial cliff here insofar as, building the preventative structure, because, and maybe that's the first thing to talk about is, where we are, insofar as the health of our current generation and our upcoming generation, and why this is such a timely endeavor.
Yeah, again, tons to talk about there. Maybe just if I frame what Wellnify is. So Wellnify is a hybrid of two words, part wellness, part gamification. And what we really do is help to create healthier and happier communities. And we're doing it once again by an AI-driven digital ecosystem that we proudly call a community wellness engagement platform. And what we're doing that's super unique is that we're combining the emerging science of behavior change that everyone's talking about because it's responsible for healthy habit formation. And we are coupling it together with the fun of gaming or gamification to really reinvent the way that bottom-up wellness programs are being designed right now across North America. And if I think about what it means to be Canadian, one of the things is that while healthcare isn't free, it's freely accessible to all. Yet wellness right now resides behind a paywall for the people who can afford an $1,800 Apple Watch or a trip down to Sensei Spa. But for the vast majority of people, it's not accessible. And we've embraced a slogan, and that is, we believe the time is now to start investing in building stronger fences at the top of a cliff rather than only more ambulances at the bottom. And thankfully, we're not the only ones that think this. Really leading epidemiologists and healthcare economists believe we're in the middle of a $1 trillion shift away from primary and acute care towards more prevention and upstream solutions. But let's talk about some of the problems, right? We've got skyrocketing chronic diseases. We have unsustainable healthcare costs. We have a completely disconnected sense of community. We have a 10 million shortfall of healthcare professionals over the next decade globally. And we say a statement, and Jeremy, it does rub some people the wrong way, but we feel it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. And that is that we believe we are witnessing the world's largest self-inflicted serial killing in the annals of humankind. So much so it's extinction level behaviors that we are exhibiting right now. And it's time to do something about it. And that's the mission we're on. I do have to say that we have identified, not just us, but research has identified what some of those causes and contributions to poor health of the globe are. Number one, it's sitting or sedentary behavior. We've all heard the term sitting is the new smoking. Two, it's this thing. It's the phone that's hijacking a lot of our wellness behaviors. What we're trying to do at Wellnify is flip the script and take something that's historically been responsible for lethargy and turn it into an agent of change. And the last one, in Canada, we're really bad for it, is that we have outdated education and knowledge transfer models as it relates to wellness information. About 98% of wellness content in this country resides in a PDF that reeks of yesterday, or it's 6 clicks deep in a website that no one uses. So what we've done is we've designed a highly configurable white label digital ecosystem that connects a organization like a municipality, like a government, like a school board, like a corporation, like an indigenous community to their end population, again, through a platform that creates more of a pull rather than a push. And this is, again, where we redirect some of the sticky and addictive features of gaming towards the colonization of these healthy habits that give people agency and dominion. There is that saying, you don't choose your future. We actually choose our habits, and it's our habits that are the silent, insidious architects of our future. And we believe we're in the business of literally cultivating healthy habits to give that dominion back to the people.
So, and both are a delight. So yeah, I definitely want to hear more about the tech platform, and just given the timely nature of, your recent press release with the Texas Community Challenge there, specifically connecting to 200 organizations. It would be great to let's hear about because we've actually been talking about a lot of the theory around this. So yeah, let's talk about the practical and like, hey, actually this already exists. And then let's talk about some of the use cases and the benefits that you're seeing both locally. Internationally, the homegrown spirit and, grow where you're planted, and a deep respect for everything that you've done and are doing and will do for the community. But then there's, also the global pollination in tough times between nations, for example. And it's like the reality is our health and the love of each other is what is going to unite us. So I think that there is something to be said, for that expedition as well. So yeah, let's talk about the tech, and then let's talk about what we're doing to bridge worlds here.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Well, look, the way that, and again, I got to give huge credit to Brendan Ferguson, who runs our tech team, and our whole tech team for configuring a platform that's scalable and malleable. But the way it works is we have two sort of components to our platform. We have a back end or a control center. This is a web-based portal. And we have about 80 different tools and features that we can turn on or off based on what the go-to-market community and partner needs and wants. We can take their existing content, pollinate it into the back end, and deliver it in a much more highly engaging, gamified way. And we can configure ecosystems within hours or max days rather than weeks, months, or years. But after we've configured it, we create a unique QR code, and then we allow the people in the community to enter into the platform where we engage them underneath 4 wellness categories, underneath something called the daily quest. And the daily quest, you have a to-do underneath each one of these categories that takes a maximum about 10 to 12 minutes. We have a body or a move category, and this is where we've got about 150 augmented reality movements that through proprietary algorithms we built into the phone. You can put the phone down on the side of the wall, and it tracks your movements with about 98% accuracy, converts them to live reps, and then to a live leaderboard on behalf of your community. It's essentially like a video game experience when you're doing physical activity. People love this feature. But this is also where we plan exercise programs and plans based on people's fitness capacities and their times and their access to equipment. And we've also got all these step counting features and functionalities where you and I could challenge 2 friends on who could walk from here to Toronto the fastest. So it's neat ways to, again, encourage movement in a fun, gamified way. I'm going to move to the Mind category because this is where it's like a learning management light tool where we're gamifying knowledge transfer. Each day you wake up under the Mind category, there's a little nugget of wisdom brought to you by a professional. After you watch that 30-second to 1-minute video, a little quiz pops up or trivia. And if you answer correctly, you earn more digital currency and coinage. We have a spirit section, and this is where we drip feed a little mindfulness or a meditation program, kind of 1 to 3 minutes long. You can listen to nature sounds. And again, each day it's sort of different. But the new category we've added, it is absolutely our favorite, and it's called community. And look, we've been lucky enough to travel around the world to study some of the healthiest cultures on the planet, places like the Blue Zones. We studied the Amish. We've studied other really thriving cultures. And what the research and what we found is the common denominator for these thriving communities is much less that they have access to a 24-hour fitness facility, but it's more that they prioritize serving other people in their community. So what we're doing underneath the community section is creating intentionality and gamification around some of these pay it forward actions. So if you pick up a piece of litter and you take a picture of it, if you volunteer your time for organization in need, if you send a positive message, if you become a blood donor, if you buy a local program, you are contributing to the betterment of the people that you are living amongst. And we're trying to turn economies back into communities. And what we found when we launched this is that it's been the most heavily used part of the application, which is proof that people want to contribute. People want that oxytocin secretion that Mother Nature put inside us that kept us alive for millennia when we do good things for other people. There's that saying that, hey, I once helped a man climb a mountain only to realize I was at the top too, right? Or societies grow great when old people plant trees of whose shade they will never lie under. And these are concepts that we are trying to manifest under the community section. And we're just so overjoyed to see the uptake of it. And it's proof, despite the, what's happening around the globe, that there's a lot of kindness there that needs to be uncovered. It needs to be promoted, it needs to be nurtured. And we want to help do that.
It's interesting to hear you say the oxytocin positive feedback versus the dopamine feedback, which, it's interesting. I didn't think about it that way, but that's, what we get from human interaction, right? Is, so I think there's like a like in your feed, or a video that's stimulating, that's a dopamine hit. I never thought about a tech facilitated oxytocin positive feedback. That's really interesting. And I guess what you're saying is that's the most popular feature as of late.
That's right. That's right. Again, it's proof. It's proof.
And that's we're not, one of the things we spoke about last time is like, we're not trying to take phones away from people. What we're trying to do is actually use the infrastructure to insert the better habit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, one thing to mention too, because I think the listeners might find it interesting. We're working on 2 algorithms. One's called the Personal Wellness Score, which is a snapshot of how you are doing on your wellness journey. On any given day, it's out of 100, and it's not based on, how many push-ups you can do or how many steps. It's based on consistent actions and behaviors. And it's reflective of where you are in your journey. But more importantly, Jeremy, we're aggregating everyone's personal wellness score into an overarching proxy called a community wellness score, which is reflective of your population, your community, your municipality, your school board. Where are they collectively compared to others? And we believe we are going to help the, governments all over North America and Europe illuminate blind spots, weaknesses inside communities. Why does this community walk on average 2,000 steps more than this? Maybe it's because they don't have enough sidewalks or access to public parks. Why does this community pick up 85% more litter than this? Who's in the community that's, a maven or a thought leader that's influencing that we can replicate in others? So we feel that this is going to be a diagnostic tool that does a great service to humanity. And we're really excited about the impact. This isn't just creating an efficiency in the CRM system. This is moving the needle on, humanity.
What's amazing here, what I'm hearing, you tell me if you agree, is so when you constrain a system, and this actually comes back to how we started at the beginning, right? You constrain a system. So in this case, this is your father expecting more from you, right? Creating a vision. If you think about a country, if you constrain what success is, if it's by GDP, you're going to have this system, for no necessarily, moral reason, start to optimize to achieve that outcome, right? And the outcome won't necessarily, it might hit on wellness, but it's clearly not hitting on wellness. Anyway, I'm using the systems, analogy here, well, because I think that's what we have. We have an opportunity to constrain systems, not just on, economic outputs. Those are important, but what if the economic outputs became the byproduct of the health constraint of the wellness score, for example? And so this is, I mentioned to you, Lee Hood is recently, I think he was listed as the 41st innovative person in it's the U.S. or the world in Forbes magazine. It's probably U.S. But anyway, he's I call him the godfather of systems biology. He's been through 8 paradigm shifts. I shared his podcast with you. I think that one of the things that he brought to the surface was he wrote a book called The Age of Scientific Wellness. Him and his understudy called, his name is Dr. Nathan Price, who's at the Buck Institute now. Lee's at the Institute of Systems Biology and ISB. And anyway, he's got an initiative called phenome health, which is getting at the molecules of and the biomarkers of these other indicators, right, which are beneath the surface. But these two things, they're gonna operate in a confluence and synergistically. I think similarly to what you saw with athletes. But the reason I'm bringing up Lee is because the thing that he struggles with is he's invented this notion of the 4 Ps of scientific wellness, right? Is predictive, preventative, personalized, and participatory. And one of the hardest ones is P. How do you get people to participate? And I think this is a great jumping off point, for your recent announcement with your collaboration with the state of Texas, because I think that is the participatory there. I mean, it's clearly happening here in Nova Scotia and in Canada. But as I mentioned, there's this, international bridge that, you're facilitating there. And so how about we talk a little bit about that, just because of, the relevance of today.
Yeah.
How is that Texas partnership going? What does that look like? Yeah. Let's focus there.
Yeah, no, look, thank you for bringing it up. We're very proud of that. Healthier Texas Foundation has done great work over the years. Of course, they're suffering from a lot of poor health statistics in that state. And so they're really thinking outside the box of helping to influence people more upstream. They want the same thing we do, which is to help create lifetime participants of wellness. And they believe that we can do that. They were actually in a contract with an U.S. incumbent company and saw what we were doing, saw, the community wellness score, saw what we were doing with the community section and some of the other features. And we were thrilled that we mid-contract were able to dislodge the incumbent. And, it spoke volumes to the platform that is super sticky. But the reason why it's been such a great partnership is that they have 3,200 organizations that this is being deployed to, which does include our versions of municipalities or districts. So kind of think about it as, small town or medium-sized town challenging each other. Corporations, so corporations of all kinds, big and small, again, seeing who are the most committed to these wellness behaviors, and even school boards. So they've got schools and school systems and school boards participating in this, all again, trying to, with collective will, chase a common goal of hitting certain thresholds, earning a plethora of badges, prizes, those types of things. But the byproduct is healthier and happier people inside of a community. And, when you sign a contract like this, it's super helpful because, look, we believe we're creating a new category. And that category is democratized community wellness. Going back to, as we earlier framed it, we believe that everyone should get free access to tools that allow, the prevention of a lot of the chronic diseases. And so this becomes a flagship that a lot of the other states will look at. We're in Indiana next week. The week after, we're in Washington and North Dakota. And we hope that we're able to do a lot more south of the border. And of course, here in Canada, Nova Scotia Health and the Innovation Hub have been hugely supportive of what we're doing. We would not be where we are today if it weren't for their early belief and support. We've done a series of pilots here in our own backyard, and we're looking to do more pilots. And the ultimate goal here, Jeremy, is we want to show that the platform costs you a lot more to not use than use. And we're halfway through being able to prove that. And, we know that the healthcare system, it's buckling, it costs a lot of money, but we can't add something that adds a huge output in costs unless they can see some return on investment. And that's why our focus over the last little while has been to gestate data that points to the measurable impact of our platform. And thankfully, again, we're cultivating a lot of that meaningful data today.
Amazing. I want to be cognizant of the time. I know this is a big day for you. And I just I did have one other section to get through, which, is the existential component, right? And we spoke of earlier, which is, and we've already talked through some really great stuff, but just to kind of wrap it up and to bring it all home here, if this were our last broadcast, right? The one last broadcast we could ever make, who's the one person that you want to reach, and what's the single message that you would want to leave with them?
That's heavy. That's heavy.
Yeah,
Can I take that in two pieces?
of
Because
course.
I'm going to answer the question from a business perspective and then from a general advice perspective to a section of the population. The business side, I really want to get in front of Mark Carney. I really want to have Mark Carney and some of his ministers, Evan Solomon, who runs AI, to see what we're doing. I think we can reinforce and promote some of their mandates. One, creating healthier and happier communities, which we've been able to already prove that we can do. Two, inside the platform in a non-over-solicitorial way, position Canadian wellness products. So here's an example. This week's challenge is brought to you by, let's use the example of the Sperry, which is a Nova Scotia nutritional sort of meal product. And if you hit a threshold, you earn substantial discounts to that product. So it allows for the promotion of Canadian wellness products, and everyone benefits. And the third thing that we're trying to do, and we do need the help of a collective group of people, but we want to allow communities, when they hit certain behavior thresholds, to earn discounts to costs of daily living. So here's a couple of examples. If someone does 15 squats before the bus arrives, free digital bus passes. We're doing that right now in certain parts of the United States. If they hit a threshold, earning free gym memberships. If you hit a threshold, even reduced insurance premiums, maybe reduced cell phone costs, reduced electricity bills. We would love to be able to reward people for their commitment to wellness, because we do believe the cost benefits on the back end are going to be monolithic. And just one other really important example on this one is that we are working with certain grocers, and if people hit certain thresholds, they do earn discounts to grocery stores that they can specifically use for produce, again, to promote, healthy eating and healthy habits. So I'd love to get in front of him, in particular, as we're cultivating a lot of this data, or some of his decision makers, to say that, hey, this is a lot more expensive to not use than use, and we will guarantee that we will save the country tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in the long run if they truly embrace democratized wellness for all and remove that firewall for only the wealthy, and provide access to all these tools at a democratized level. I do want to say too that if this was the last podcast, I've got kids in that 19 to 21 year age group. I do want to just say one thing, because I think it's important for that group of people. And this is more just general advice than I'm concerned, because I think this group is growing up inside an invisible and insidious system or infrastructure that is hijacking their attention every waking second, right? We're almost beholden to an algorithm or a lot of these AI tools that don't necessarily love you back. And they're designed to kind of capture and not care for you. And I think it's important that that generation is aware of it, right? Their attention is their life. And they just need to make sure that they're very, very aware of that. Sometimes when you're in the jar, you can't read the label. And I am very concerned for that population. I think we're going to change policies younger than that, but just want to make sure that that group understands that.
Amazing. And my final question, Travis, is who would you nominate as my next guest?
This sort of might surprise you, but in Nova Scotia, we've got a lot of famous people who are athletes. We know, like the Sidney Crosbys, the Nathan McKinnons, a lot of the guys you train. We've got musicians, the Sarah McLaughlins, we've got politicians, but many people don't know that we have the world litter picker up champion, a guy by the name of Luke McDonough, who literally spends his days going around helping to create healthier communities, picking up one piece of garbage at a time. He tops the leaderboards and, kind of a lot of these international competitions. And this is just the beginning of the story. He's found a way to recycle a lot of the materials from the garbage he picks up for a certain country in Africa to use the materials to manufacture water barrels that he delivers to rural communities to allow for expeditious mobilization of water between water outlets and communities. This guy devotes his whole life to helping other people. And I think he's the guy I'd love to see a statue of in downtown Halifax in the future. He's a guy who I think it would be fascinating for you to unpack his mindset, because I think he deserves attention. I think he deserves his story to be told. Look, there's all kinds of awards in sports. There's championships, there's all-stars, there's MVPs, there's all kinds of that in business. I want to see more community leaders get their day in the sun. And I think he'd be a fascinating guest to host in the future.
Amazing. All right. We'll reach out and we'll make it happen. Travis, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you, as I mentioned, for everything that you have done, that you are doing, and that you will do. Pleasure to have you on the show today and to learn more about what you're doing.
Man, thank you. It was an absolute privilege. I've said this for years, but you are one of the best active listeners I know. And you listen not with sort of the intent to immediately respond, but you're able to listen earnestly. And it's always a great pleasure to talk with you, and looking forward to continuing to expand our friendship.
Thank you, Travis.
Thank you.
Dr. Travis McDonough reminds us that while anarchy leads to innovation, it is our collective habits that ultimately architect our future. We've moved from the me of elite performance to the we of community wellness. From the dopamine hit of a screen to the oxytocin-rich reward of a blood donation or a shared walk. The vision Travis shared today isn't just a business model, it's a responsibility. The community wellness score is now in your hands. If service is the rent we pay for being, how will you invest in the fence at the top of your own community's cliff this week? The future of preventative care isn't waiting for a government signature, it's waiting for your next habit. It's time to stop counting reps and start counting the acts of kindness that keep society alive. What will you do with the truth you now carry?